All right, so I figured that today we talk a little bit about our lives as engineers that grew up in church and came up in the church world, and eventually we work ourselves up to where we are now and touring and major working with some major artists and whatnot. There's many people that from time to time they contacted me on social media or send you an email or text message saying, hey man, I'm a up and coming engineer, I work on my church or I work in an AV company, I just want to know what you did to get to where you are. So um, I just want to take this time since we're all home and we can all do this and have the means to talk a little bit about that. How did we get started coming from the church world where we at? Some of us are still working in our churches to the touring world. So I have Brendan McDaniels with me, Tim Walker, yeah, my bad, man, and Malachi Bristol. All of you guys work with artists, and so let's maybe go one by one and just say a little bit of how did you became what you are now, or give a little bit of your background of your story or how you started becoming how you became an engineer, and things like that. So I don't know if Brandon want to take it off.
Sure. So my name is Brandon Daniels. So you get that right. No, but
that's what happened when it's unscripted, man.
Right, But yeah, I started like you said in church. Still in church, still mixing church services, still playing in church. I'm a musician at a church. I've been involved in music in church since I was about 7 years old, and I'm 31 now, so it's been a very long journey in that aspect. I really started in the audio world, just kind of playing around with it, just to kind of better the church that I was at, and to really just make things sound good when I'm playing there for the most part.
Out of necessity, like most of us.
Out of necessity. There was no sound engineer, right. There was just a nice little 20-channel analog console, Mackie.
Right? VLC Pro that all of us used to have.
Yeah, exactly. It had a little bit of effects and an EQ that everybody said you just make a smiley face on, which was the worst thing ever. But started with that, and then I enjoyed doing it, so I started doing some studio work. I went to college for studio work. Went to Five Towns College and actually have my degree in audio recording. And I didn't really enjoy being in the studio all that much. So
right.
I was like, all right, let me try out like really doing this live thing. And I love it. And,
right.
My senior year, I started my own company and started really, pushing that, buying gear and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then my first touring gig was with 50 Cent, and that was with the help of one
That's
of the
a big
guys right
gig
here.
to start with.
Big
right.
gig to start with.
That's a big
right, go from church gigs to 50 Cent, right?
Right.
And that was with the help of my dude here, Tim. So he the one that put me onto that.
So Tim, how about you? Since you're the one that put Brandon on, how did you get from? Because first of all, when I first met Tim, we were in churches. Both our churches fellowship together. He was a drummer at a church, so that's how I first met Tim. And all of a sudden, I'm like, Tim doing the road?
Right.
Oh, cool. So yeah, so how did you go from that to where you're at now?
Well, so I started. I actually started learning audio with car audio. that's how I initially learned signal
Let me
flow.
turn this down.
Right.
Yeah, he don't have a compressor, guys. Sorry.
Is that better?
Yes.
That's
thank you.
better. There we go. So I started recording audio at first. Like pretty much everybody here, I'm a musician. So started playing drums. When I was younger, I grew up in Michigan. I was born and raised in Michigan. So the technical scene wasn't that great.
Mhm.
Just wasn't. But I was big into car audio. So that's how I learned signal flow, from going from, the head unit to the amps, from the amps to the speakers. And that's how I learned general signal flow. So then from there, as time progressed, I was playing in churches and doing gigs, and I would see stuff, and I always could hear something, but at the time didn't really know what it was or didn't know how to fix it or what was wrong.
Right.
So as time progressed, then I started to, how I first got into production was teching. So that's how the majority of people, got to know me, was from being a tech. And that happened because I'm gear heavy. So I have drums galore. That's how that really got started. And so out of that space, I would do rehearsals and none of the engineers would show up.
Mhm.
That's how really I started poking around. I was doing gigs. I was doing the gigs, and the first, actually, to get on to how Brandy got on, I started doing 50 being a tech. And I knew the guys in the band. They brought me on as a tech. And at the time, the production manager was out of LA. So when we had rehearsals in New York with the band, no engineer would show up.
Mhm.
Why? I have no clue.
Right.
So I started poking around and learning my little ways and figuring out what was what and how it really worked. The first big console I worked on was the Profile. Learned my way around that. And then when the production manager left, the tour manager left, the old one came back and was like, hey, do you want to mix? So I was like, sure. So what ended up happening was I ended up going to monitors because, all of us pretty have done monitors, the artists, you get real close with them. They get real comfortable. So now they're real secure with you. And it's kind of hard when you're doing a good job to step off of that.
Right.
They're like, hey, listen, no, I need to see this guy or girl. And I know when I see them, I'm good. So when it came down to it, the tour manager was like, hey, do you have a front of house guy? And I was like, yeah, sure. Brandy. He's really good. And, what I think we've been on that gig, they got to be 8 years now.
That's good.
Wow.
Continuity. That means it's great, man. That means the artist loves you and the management loves you, which is great too.
Yeah.
Definitely.
What about you, Mel? Background story of Mel. I met Malachi at his church while we were working at his church with another sound company, and I believe that's how we first met. And then eventually we ended up working together for that other sound company locally here too.
Definitely. So I pretty much started out, like as a musician playing drums. But my church was fortunate. I actually had one of the largest churches in Queens. Yeah. So our system was kind of complex already, just to start with me, just, growing up in the church regardless. So, and we had pretty much established musicians already. So I couldn't really play drums, maybe for the youth choir or something, youth team. So Sundays I really wasn't doing anything. And, being a younger guy, I was just restless sitting in church, not doing nothing. So also at the same time, that worship pastor was like the head of sound, the head of this, the head of that. So he's doing, he's leading worship, he's leading worship, leading worship and going down to the monitor console and making little changes. So there was nobody there at all.
Right.
So I don't know. I just happened to look. My grandmother went to him and said, hey, he needs something to do to keep him busy.
Grandma.
So like I said, it was, straight analog, massive console, 32 channels, big Yamaha console, huge. and didn't know nothing. All I knew was, hey, turn that knob up a little bit, turn that knob. Didn't know anything. Didn't know anything about graphics, anything.
Yeah.
And I just knew what I wanted to hear. I knew what sounded good, what didn't sound good. So I tried to, kind of try to make it sound good, basically, without knowing nothing.
Yeah.
Just
good.
turning knobs.
That's all it's about.
Yeah, right.
I mean, we all had that in the trenches moment. We didn't know anything,
Nothing.
and we had to learn by ourselves and figure it out.
Definitely.
How did you get your first chance to get on the road, Malcolm?
Oh goodness. First gig. Working with local companies, of course. We all know the local companies here, and a coworker was like, "Hey, I can't go out on this gig. Do you want to do it?" That's pretty much how it started.
Yeah.
And I ended up as a backline tech for Corey Henry. That was my first gig, my first official tour.
Nice.
And I did that for a couple years. And I think the next gig, I kind of ended up on that Hez and Israel tour.
Oh yeah. I
remember that one?
Yeah.
Right. And kind of from there, that's how
I remember that.
Gradually
Actually,
progressed.
one of my buddy of mine's, Matt, he was the lighting for Israel on that run, I believe.
Oh, dope. Yeah.
From Atlanta.
That's pretty good, man.
That's awesome, man. I mean, I think all of us have pretty much the same story. We grew up in church, or we went to church, and out of necessity, we ended up being the sound guy. I mean, for me too, man. I mean, I was PK in South America, trying to help your dad play the drums and do the sound with the other hand, in those 6-channel mixers back then, PV 6-channel mixers. And you had to make it sound good, Fast forward, moving to the States. Again, same thing, helping my dad with his Spanish ministry on this church here. I had to learn quickly how to, utilize a bigger console and things like that. So little by little, I ended up doing not just my dad, but then the English speaking church and the Wednesday Bible studies, and the guys that were here volunteering kind of left, and I was now the head guy or whatever, so you're forced to learn real quick, everything. Yeah. So I kind of bought my first book about audio, the Yamaha Handbook of Audio, which is kind of like the Bible for every engineer, and kind of read through it and kind of figure out things on my way,
Right.
But, fast forward to getting on the road, for me, it was also, again, a coworker that I went to fill in for when he joined somewhere else, and I fill in for him in front of house. Then the minor position for the artist came on, and it was available, and I jumped on that. And from there, you network your way to the next artist and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I get, asked a lot is that, hey, man, how do you get in your church to the ministry to help you buy equipment and our pastor or our music director or the deacon or the usher board or whatever, they don't understand that we need this new piece of gear or we want to upgrade and things like that. So for me personally, my answer is always trying to have some sort of relationship with the pastor or whoever that person in charge is, and a lot of, explaining of why you need it and why not. But I don't know if one of you guys can just, or maybe all of you can tell me if you got to that point sometimes, did you get to your point, or how did you were able to accomplish, get a new upgrade in your gear? How did you do it? I don't know if you can explain or talk about it a little bit. Anybody can jump in.
Yeah, I'll start.
Yeah, go ahead, Ma.
Yeah. So, man, pretty much, I was, geez, you can't get, people to order equipment if they don't trust you.
Yeah.
So me starting out, I was like 12, 13 years old saying, hey, we need this. They weren't listening to me. I didn't know anything myself.
Right.
So I really had to show them, well, first of all, I had to show them that I work with other companies for them to start letting me,
Right.
to start trusting me a little bit, to show, okay, he knows a little bit what he's doing.
Right.
A lot of them seen my outside work.
Right.
And that's when I really started to get, the trust from the church to start basically allowed to buy equipment and stuff like that. So that's how it started with me.
Yeah.
It's a lot of politicking.
True.
Honestly, like you gotta talk to the right person, and you gotta pretty much dumb it down to a way that they can really understand it. Because if you get real technical with the people in your church, they're absolutely not gonna know what you're talking about. So you kind of gotta be like, yo, we need it for this reason. And that reason, you have to find the reasons that make sense to them, not really the ones that make sense to you. So
that's true.
Right.
Yeah,
True.
yeah.
I mean, the knowledge that we have, they don't have it. So we kind of have to dumb it down sometimes and either show. There's people that are visual and they need to see it. There's other people that you can just tell them and they'll trust you,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times.
How about you, Tim?
You muted,
That's
bro.
cool. Can't hear you. That's cool.
Sorry, bro. We can't hear you, bro.
Hear me now?
Yep.
Yep.
How many sound guys does it take to get a mic on?
Be mindful. So yeah, it did take a lot of politicking. That was the initial. And you have to keep in mind, especially in our world as far as church, that you have to make it something that will complement the ministry. Right. It can't just be, this new piece of gear came out and I want it. What happened at my church was we were growing. Right. So we were adding stuff, we were adding singers, we were adding band members, and what was the we did two overhauls. The first is when my church got done over. So that's another opportunity. If your church is being renovated, that's one good opportunity to come in. And it's also good, even if you have knowledge, to bring someone in to help with assessing the room. This it's not just your opinion. It's, hey, listen, I went out.
Somebody else came in.
Church. This guy came in, and he looked at it for me. What we're concluding can aid with X, Y, and Z. You also want to ask them, the pastor or maybe the trustee members, what do you guys need in the church?
Right.
Pastor, are you able to hear yourself? Are the people able to hear you? Funny enough, because we're musicians, a lot of times they think we care more about the music than anything.
Right.
And a real engineer knows the first priority is the vocals.
It's that star. That star on the stage.
It don't matter how good the band sounds. If it gets up and you can't hear them, it doesn't matter what gear you got in there. It's null and void. Yep. So once you can kind of work your way around understanding the needs of the house, because every church doesn't need a big desk.
Right, correct.
Church doesn't need line arrays.
Correct.
It'd be nice, but every church doesn't need it.
Correct.
So you just got to also not overshoot it. Some guys get excited, they learn about new stuff, and then they overshoot it. Oh, well, we need this board that's, $6,000. The church doesn't have that.
Then you got to be able to operate that $6,000 too. Right. Like you have to have the knowledge for it.
Right. And there's nothing worse than asking for a piece of gear and they get it, and then something still doesn't work.
Correct. Yeah,
because like we paid all this money for you not to be able to use it, or it's too complicated for us to use it. Now what are we going to do?
Right.
Correct. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. For me, for this church here, it took a while. We coming from, we had a transition of pastors. Our bishop retired, and we have the new pastor. Um, and with the new pastor came a lot of technology upgrades for us. So we had to, kind of get with the times for us. So, but with that also meant that I had to prove myself to them to say, hey, I got this set skills, I can do it, and when you buy it, I will be able to operate it, and it's going to be worth your money, because I can't justify, let me get a new console, digital console. We're going to do a whole Ableton rig, new monitors, all of it, and then I can operate it,
Right.
I can't justify that. So it's also for any upcoming engineer out there that's probably looking at us, watching us, it's knowing how to use the tools that you're asking for, having the knowledge for it.
Right.
I don't know if anybody has any other thing to say. No? Great. So when it comes to several other questions, a lot of people want to know tricks and tips on how we do things and why and so forth. And usually I just don't answer to those because I don't know the situations that are happening in their churches. We don't know anything about it. And there's so many variables, you have
so many bad
musicians, and then you have the just pot bangers, that they're just really not musicians,
Right.
but they're just thrown in the fire to play at their church. Then you have, mic techniques and whatnot. But, usually I try to ask questions, about it if I'm going to give them an opinion. But for me specifically here, what we do and what we got is for these people that work here,
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else has an opinion on this. Want to comment, guys?
I know, like, for my church, we don't have a very large church. It's a decent size.
Okay.
What ended up happening was we got the first upgrade, which was the X32, which was huge.
Which is this, by the way, guys, if you're looking, this is the X32 here.
Which is a great desk.
Right.
We've all been able and blessed to work on bigger, but for
Right.
a lot of our churches' capacities and for what they're trying to do,
Yeah.
the X32 works just fine.
Yeah.
And I tell some people, sometimes I go in and they have so much extra going on. I'm like, dude, this could be a lot simpler.
A lot simpler,
You
yes.
could have a lot more. I could
Right.
turn a church around with an X32 and some bad speakers.
Yeah.
Just off of being able to, the old analog days, you had to have, external compressors and gates, and they like you had to have all of that external. Now with that, it comes all in. So it helped a lot being able to improve the overall of the service. And with my church, when that came in, we were able to really start turning things around. And from there, it was now assessing what were the needs.
Yeah. Right.
What sounded best in the room, what was problematic. The first thing was me. I was loud.
Yeah.
that's the first problem with Cartier churches.
Right.
Drums is too loud. So now trying to ask for a bigger speaker, more subs, God knows subs.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of churches feel like subs mean loud.
Yeah.
It's not the case.
Right.
So trying to work through, even you as an engineer, getting more knowledge on the usefulness of these, or saying, hey, listen, let's be more solution driven. Let's cage in the drums because it will eliminate more of the acoustic volume.
Right.
And it will allow you to utilize the speakers more and have more control. See, when you say it like that, church is like, wait, it'll be quieter?
Yeah.
Oh, hit the cage.
It happened here, man. Over here now, prior to, we have a full cage on our drums now. And actually the cage has acoustic panels inside of it and everything. But prior to this was nothing on it, and it was loud, man. And competing against it, trying to mix every Sunday, competing against that, it's like,
impossible.
oh my goodness, it's a battle. It's almost impossible, like you said.
Yeah.
So when designing an audio system for a church, is you gotta, kind of have all kind of information before people like us recommend anything. Like what kind of service do you do? What kind of music do you play? Who's in your band, and how many singers and all that. So yeah, for us, the drum cage was the first thing, because that was like night and day, like we have a small church, as you can see here too, 100 something people, that's it.
Right.
In a very small stage, very tight. So the drum cage was the first thing for us to quiet down the drums. Then I have full control over it, on the console.
Yeah.
Any comments? I know, Malachi, you went, when I first met you, you went in through a big change in your church.
Goodness,
we took that big analog console out and put an SD9 on his church. It's like,
oh, man.
Sheesh.
Yeah.
It's a good upgrade, though.
That was an amazing upgrade, man. That was like,
that's a really good upgrade.
I went to Malachi's church. I was like, you got Martin on that racing here?
Right.
And you're about to get an SD9, SD21 and World.
And at the time, I believe it was the only church on the west side, on the west coast or the west hemisphere that had Martin.
Yeah.
Because, they're a European company.
Yeah.
And we have these massive boxes. I think we have like,
they're huge.
It's like 12, 16
they're
boxes.
huge.
No, it's from
the ceiling to the floor.
Right. So of course, one of the issues we had was coverage. Right, because our church is super wide.
Yeah, super wide, and then not too the length is not that big.
Right. It's not too much depth. Right. So what we first did was break down the boxes, basically.
Yeah.
And so we can get the coverage around the whole church.
Yeah.
After that, because it's not just one thing.
Yeah,
it's never just one issue. There's always several issues. So we had to start somewhere, and that's where we started with. So we hadn't changed to the Digico yet. We started with the boxes, change the cover, get more coverage or even coverage around the church. That helped out. Then we started with the microphones. We went from 58s to Sennheiser, all wireless.
Right.
So we just started little by little.
Little by little, step by step, yeah.
Great, step by step, and then we eventually went to. We had the M7CL. I think that was every church's backbone, kind of. That's where a lot of people started.
At the time, it was a great
console, man. That's kind of one of my first.
It's the first digital console I used.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That and the 5D for me was one of the first ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
On the digital side.
And then from there we upgraded again to we needed more channels.
Yeah.
So we went to the SD9, and of course we would have went bigger, but what happened was just price factor. And then also at the time, now these consoles, you can update these consoles. It doesn't matter what it's a Surface now.
Yep.
It's not even just a Surface. So you can have 100 and something channels in that SD9 now.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
And that's another thing that you mentioned, that you went step by step. You don't these churches don't ever have to buy everything all at once.
Yeah.
Right.
Like you can always make upgrades when the budget opens up for
Yeah.
the upgrades to happen.
Indeed.
You don't have to buy a PA and a console and mics and a new keyboard. You don't have to get it all done at one time.
Right.
And if you want to get it all done at one time, there's always loans out there for that type of stuff too. So if you want to pay it off,
there is equipment loans that you can, as a church, you can go and get. You know, I don't think a lot of churches know that stuff. You know, that information is not out there, but there is loans specifically for equipment only that you can get as a sound company or as a church to get equipment for your church. You know, and pay it off as whatever the deal you make with them. But yeah, a lot of churches unfortunately have to depend on like you know, financing. They do it by tithing and by offering or special offerings and things like that. And it takes a long time to upgrade. So like Brandon say, you know, you don't have to do it all at one time. Like Malachi gave us an example of how he did it. Sometimes you just got to, you know, pick the one thing that you need the most at the moment, you know, and then just build on that. Until you get to what you got. And here, you know, that's how it started for me. It was the drum cage first. Yeah. Once we had the drum cage, all right, we have the drum cage. Now we can get some good microphones for the drums. We changed keyboards. We got wireless microphones for the background singers and the soloists. We eventually, when we wanted to do Ableton on our church, we have an Ableton playback here. To complement the band. So we're like, okay, well, now I need a console to handle all of that. So we went with the X32 due to budget factors. You know, I would love to have something else, but the X32 did the job, you know, that we needed it. So we got the X32, you know, and all that extra stuff that comes with it, which is the in-ear systems for it. We got some PSM for the singers as well. But yeah, everything went step by step without having to kill the church on a big budget, you know. So I think for everybody listening, I think making a list of things that you need and you can do step by step will be the best choice for our church. And maybe it will be even received better by a pastor or by a church board, you know, saying, oh, this guy's not out here just to get all our money and
just
play with new toys, you know? Do
it in phases.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the last few installations I've done in churches where it was like it was in 3 phases because obviously, you know, you don't want to put out $40,000 all at one time. Correct.
Yeah,
you know,
and 40,000 if you're going on the cheaper route. You can't go super expensive very quick.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh,
absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess the next thing we can talk is how do you approach your church's mixes? I know every church is different, but there's some certain basic things that we all do as engineers to mix our church services. And I'm just talking church services because this is kind of want to gear to. Eventually we can talk about the road and all of that, but that's a different beast to me.
Definitely.
That we do in church, you know.
Depending on the church you're mixing at.
True. I'm gonna get to those churches. I will have 100 channels on them.
Right.
But I mean, as an engineer, your basic things. What is it? What's your approach? I mean, I'll start off by saying, for me, it's the money person, and that's usually the pastor or the lead singer.
Absolutely.
You know, just knowing those guys are the guys that are the main, you know, person on your whole entire church service. That gives you the base to start a mix or the big picture. You know, what is it for you guys? Is it the same, or do you guys have different approaches?
I would say it's pretty much the same. Definitely have to make sure that you hear the lead vocal, then the backgrounds come in somewhere very close but under them. Right. I personally like to feel drums. Always,
Yeah.
So I'm a drummer, so I understand.
Like
the drums got to be there.
If my drums aren't good in my mix, I feel like my mix is terrible after that. So, and kind of
there is a reason for that. For anybody that's watching this right now, there's a reason why when drums and bass is not really present on the mixes, sometimes it sounds like it's not right. Mm-hmm. It's because the rhythm section. You know what I'm saying? Exactly. You can just play drums and bass and singers and it'd be straight, The rest of the stuff is all fill in for at least for me,
Yeah,
but
it's easy to place keys in the middle of that, keys and guitar, unless like you're dealing with a different type of music. But yeah, that's typically how I build my mixes for church. I mean, we're not really talking about the tour world, but it's kind of very similar in that aspect too, But yeah, always vocals gotta be up front though. Like that's just that's who the audience wants to hear the most. Right. So you want to be able to execute that, and make sure that
translate that,
and translate that,
Right. I mean, I think Malachi, you're a front of house engineer for the most part. You can probably say the same or different.
Yeah. So like I said, every church is so unique,
different,
and especially my church in this situation, my worship pastor is the lead singer as well as the lead, piano player at the same time. So you really have to make sure everyone can hear that the keys, because she'll start out the song. That's how most of the songs will start, is with the keys.
Yeah.
Right.
So really got to make sure that that's nice and hot, so everyone can hear it.
Correct.
It wouldn't. That's not typically. You wouldn't have the keys blazing in the mix, but for this, for this situation, that's kind of what it is.
And if you're mixing gospel, don't forget about the organ. That's boy.
But that's relative too.
Exactly.
It's like
there's so many things. I mean, honestly, I've been able to mix kind of different church vibes, if you would call it. I have mixed here. This is gospel straight up all day long.
Right.
So the gospel is very rhythmic. So there's drums, organ, everything has to be, pumping.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to something like more contemporary. Then you got to figure out, okay, there's
keys.
Some pretty stuff on pads and keys, and then a nice guitar swell or something, and drums and bass are kind of in there, doing the rhythm part. But there's so much other things happening on the on the pads and keys and things like that you got to bring that forward first.
Absolutely.
So there's different things, and everything. I think we can say that the vocals is the number one thing. That's on top of everybody.
Definitely.
And that's gotta, if you want to get technical, that's gotta be right in the middle of the stereo image. Where it's gonna come out at you. Tim, you do monitors as well a lot. A lot of churches have issues with feedback. That's almost a lot of the churches that I've been to, even as a guest or even as a showing up on the spot engineer, that you get put on spot. Oh, I'm like, you're here. Can you just jump on the console and be like, well, okay. But feedback has always pretty much, it's always the reason, whoever that was calling, thank you.
Right. Yeah, questions. It's okay.
Feedback is an issue.
Oh, yeah.
Would you be able to speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's I guess you would say there's two tiers, right? You have those churches that only have one desk, or I guess there's a couple of tiers. If you only have one desk, you want to first see your monitors and your monitor positioning. Your monitor to mic positioning.
Right.
You have to make sure that is correct.
Sure.
and that goes along. Some churches don't. Now, if we're talking,
I had thoughts. I'm sorry. I had thoughts. I'm sorry. I had a moment.
As you can see, if you're
monitor
watching
to
this,
mic position, PA to mic position.
you standing right in front of a speaker, like I don't know why. I said, bro, that's not how it works.
as you can see, this is common in churches, guys.
Yeah.
This is like 101 in churches problem sometimes. You know, the design of the PA and the design of the stage is always 99% is not even thought about. You know, it's what it looks good in church, but in reality, that's causing so much problems. So yeah, like what Tim is saying just now is that we got to think about those things. You know.
So that that'd be the start of your fixing the problem. The next thing is, before you even get to how to hold the mic or proper mic etiquette, would be gain staging. A lot of people go wrong with gain staging.
Yes.
And they don't understand how to get more volume out of something. So they'll just crank it up. And you will most likely, occur a problem. Now, there are some cases where if we're starting at the lowest, most basic level, and you don't have, say, an X32 that has a graphic EQ in it, the only thing you got to go off of is your parametric on each channel. So if you're a start out engineer, it's good to know how to EQ and get a good EQ on a mic. Know what the primary problem frequencies are, and go from there, because you don't have really much to work with. Once you get a step up from that and you get, say, an X32 that has the graphic EQs in it, what is a great help is, if you're starting out, get you a free RTA right on your phone. It will allow you to be able to, see what the frequencies are. All of us use them, whether from the most basic form to your phone to up to a computer with smart. We use it because I know back in the day, they used their ears. That's great and all. I'd love to be able to stretch that muscle, but you don't always want the feedback hitting your ears for you to hear what the issue is. So, being able to go and learn that process, and also sitting down and talking with the singers and the pastor on how to handle the microphones.
Yeah.
That is a huge thing. There's a lot of churches in church where they love cupping the mic and they love right on it, and then they'll scream in the mic and then point it right down at the speaker.
Yeah.
No.
and then say they can't hear.
Right.
So one thing that I started to do with the praise and worship team at my church was I started to tell them how to listen with intent.
Right.
Have to learn how to listen and know what you're looking for. And listen, and sometimes
especially when you have only one mix on stage and everybody got to listen out of that one mix.
Right. It's
you,
like,
you shouldn't be trying to hear yourself specifically in that. Like, that's not.
It's a collaboration of hearing yourself with everybody else on that.
Right. So they end up having that problem. Right. They don't know how to listen to each other.
Right.
Hey, listen, what are we trying to figure out, or what are we trying to hear? Can I hear the altos? Can I hear the sopranos? Can I hear the tenor? Whatnot? For my church I would call it a traditional progressive church. So we're really, really quote unquote churchy.
That's accurate.
But very churchy. So when my pastor's up there preaching, when he starts to tune up, or when he's organ to back him up, the organ has to be there.
Right.
Because they preach with a cadence. Some of you don't know what a cadence is, it's with a certain rhythm. Yeah. When you breathe, that's a cadence. So they are in sync or in line with the organist, where those two have to match or they'll feel off.
Yeah.
So talking to the pastor, conversation is great. Hey, pastor, bishop, reverend, doctor, what is it that you need when you're preaching?
Correct.
Can you hear yourself? And mixing is not a a good mix is not set it and leave it. When you're mixing, you're always touching the desk. At one point, you got to ride it. You got to ride your faders. You got to know when he needs more, when she needs less. Or some people just think, oh, just set it, leave it, walk away, close the board. And it's just a good
especially
mix.
in a church setting, you know, like in a church setting, we don't have as much leeway that we got on tour where it's rehearsed for 3-4 weeks, a set list, you know, and it won't change. That set list won't change in most cases. You know, we can create snapshots and go, but
just flip it.
You know, on the church, it's like the pastor said something 5 minutes ago in the office, but 2 minutes from now, it's a total different story, you know, and we got to change stuff on the fly. So for church engineers, yeah, I mean, very important, like what Tim said, is communication with the pastor, you know, open a channel of communication, you know, like listen to what he has to say, what he wants to feel. At the end of the day, that's the person you are catering to, you're working for, in a sense. For me personally, kind of to speak on that, I had to sit down with my pastor and have a conversation and be like, hey, what are you trying to do? What are we accomplishing here? You know, because I don't want to fight you in certain things, you know. I want to have a good experience for the guests that's coming into the church, for our praise and worship leaders to be having a good time, because if they have a good time, that means, you know, they're do their job well. I don't want to fight with musicians telling me turn up the whole service, and especially the pastor when he goes up to speak, you know. So opening the channel of communication with my pastor and then with the musical director, whoever's in charge of worship. That was two things for me that was very important. Once you know that information, then now you have kind of like, okay, I have a point of reference,
right?
You know, as an engineer, to kind of where we want to all go together. So yeah, that was very important. So communication with your pastor guys and to your music director or your choir director, that's going to be key for you to understand what you got to do at the end of the day behind the console.
Yeah.
Anything else you guys want to add to that?
That one thing I've noticed is kind of rough is, especially it can be this case in churches, everybody has an opinion.
Yeah.
Everybody has an opinion on how they feel like the mix should be. And you have to learn how to communicate with who you need to communicate with. Because there'll be somebody who's walking out, mother or somebody sitting on one side of the church, oh, you know, I really couldn't hear X, Y, or, oh, you should turn this down. It's like, oh, okay. And you talk to who you need to talk to get a reference of what is okay for the house.
Right.
You know, this is to overall help, you know, if like at my church when I'm in the cage, I can't tell the front of house guy, or funny enough, Brandon partially does front of house. We both mix and play at my church, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
It's superhuman, but it's really
doing
fun.
Monitors, I'm doing front of house from the keyboard.
Right. And I'm doing monitors from the drum.
iPad.
iPads.
And
That's
but
something.
I can't have my headphones on and I can't have my headphones on and be like, oh, front of house don't sound right.
Right.
It's unrealistic. I can't hear what that sounds like. So you have to build a level of understanding with the people around who are functioning and working to say this is working, this is not.
Right.
It's very, very key. You have to build that level of understanding.
Yeah, especially if you're using volunteers. Like, I don't know for you guys, but over here at my church, you know, we have several volunteers because one, when I was traveling a lot, you know, pretty much every weekend, I was not at my church,
right.
But I still have to be the head of it, you know, and still. So we had volunteers. So there's got to be also another open channel again with your volunteers,
Right.
explaining to what you're looking for and how you're doing things. And sometimes the volunteers are not necessarily the most knowledgeable. Again, there goes back to the whole entire actual word volunteer. You know, this is a church. We do this for the love of God, and you know, although we do it, but there's a certain level of professionalism we have to have and skill set to do
Absolutely.
it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, you two guys are doing dual purpose stuff, like playing at your church and also doing engineering. It's tough. So I guess, like you said, Tim, that knowing what your pastor expects, how the audience is reacting, you are able to kind of have a gauge to see, okay, well, it's good, it's not,
Right.
for you guys. Brandon, I don't know if you want to add anything to what you've been saying.
Yeah, I mean, that y'all pretty much covered it all. I mean, it definitely have to have an open communication with the pastor. You have to have an open communication with the teams involved, the ones that actually have to use use the system. So like that's your praise team, that's your praise leader.
Okay.
And you can't completely just discount how they feel or what they hear either.
Right.
Like 100%. Sometimes it absolutely doesn't make sense. but other times it's like, okay, let me look into it. Let me just see, like, maybe it's something that can be addressed. Like there's been times where mics were just off. We thought they were on. And they're like, yo, we can't hear. And then we're like, well, you should be able to hear. We didn't mute anything. And it was like, oh no, we did mute everything. Got it, my bad. So that's all it is, and you got to just be respectful also, with all of that.
Of course.
That's really the key to a lot of this.
Yeah. And also teaching them too, man. Like having, for example, in my case, my wife is the person worship leader and the choir director. So kind of like being able to show her things and tell her why and why not, it's kind of helps to not have any issues,
Right.
Talking to the band members as well as to why am I doing certain things, like, why did I took the guitar cab out of the stage? It's no longer there, and why it's just at the end now, and why there's a cage on the drums, and why why there's no more stage monitors in the bands, and now ears, and everybody has to now learn how to utilize in-ears because it's totally different, from when a wedge to in-ears,
Absolutely.
Having to actually teach them how to use their personal monitors for Behringer, it's communication and kind of like showing them how to do things, giving them knowledge in order to kind of win this overall battle, or this overall picture.
Yeah.
I think almost out of time, but we lost Malachi. So I just want to say, guys, thank you for coming in, joining me for like a couple minutes. Just kind of talk to some of these guys that have questions. And hey, he's back. That's when I was saying the benediction. But no, I mean, I don't know, Malachi, if you wanted to add anything before we kind of close it out to what we were saying, as far as the communication with the pastor and with the bands and all that.
I'm sorry?
I don't know if you wanted to add anything to what we were saying.
With communication?
Yeah, with communication with the pastor and bands in order to get the whole picture,
So, man, it's so important for everyone to be in sync, especially in church.
Yeah.
Because like I said, a lot of people have their own opinions of, what it should sound like.
Yeah.
And we just have to come to an agreement.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it,
Especially if you're in a small enough church where you got the older saints, you know,
Right in the front.
right in front
of the subs.
You're changing the heart rates, you know, as you go.
It's like, yeah, you might want to put them in the back.
Right. Or, you know, and for the most, sometimes, man, those older saints got, you know, a lot of pull in the church, you know what I'm saying? And you gotta, whew, you'll be getting meetings in the church after church because it's like so-and-so say something. And I'm like, well, she was sitting right on top of the subs. I mean,
right. She was actually sitting on it.
I think her heart pace changed a little bit.
Right.
But yeah, I think one of the things that we can take away from today, guys, is like communication, you know, is key. Knowledge and how to do things and how to operate your own equipment is key. Knowledge, giving knowledge to the praise and worship team and your pastor for them to not look at you sideways and to kind of understand where you're coming from when you're asking for things.
Yeah.
That's important. I think that's probably the most important, to be honest. That's one of the things that I hope everybody can take away from our conversation. And if there's any questions, I will put our information in the YouTube link underneath, and you can email us and send us some questions, and then we'll probably do another one Zoom meeting like this, and we'll answer some of your questions. So I want to thank everybody. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I hope everybody's doing safe. Stay safe, healthy. Please don't go outside. And if you do, put a mask on it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right, guys. Peace, man. See you guys in the next one.
All right.